it can be educational, it can be rewarding. And I think what we found is, and that's evidenced by the 15+ minutes, it can be fun. Yeah, the behavioral science here, I mean, is really important because we all hear this term behavioral science and you kind of think, well, what does this really mean? This is the science of decision making. And I don't know if any of you have read the works of people like Daniel Kahneman, who are very influential in this field. But one of the things we've got to realize about decision making is that we bring our own biases and preconceptions to almost every decision that we make. And so for this game to be successful, we've got to have a little bit of fun with those preconceptions, because actually part of the learning experience lies in the distance between your perception and what we now know as reality based on the science as it stands. And so actually that gap is the decision-making space that we've got to fill. Now, if you do read Kahneman, one of the things he talks about a lot is what's called System 1 and System 2 methods of thinking. Has anybody heard of those before? Yeah, good. So System 1 is basically the system that you use for making decisions most of the time. It's fast, it's instinctive, it's emotional, it's totally statistically illiterate, right? So it's the sort of system that says, his example early in one of his books is somebody called Steve, who's shy and retiring, likes order, is not too interested in the real world, but likes helping people. Is he more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? And our instinct is to frame him as the librarian. That's System 1 thinking. System 2, which is the rational, evidence-based part of your process, might suddenly realize there's 20 farmers for every librarian in the US. So it's far more likely to actually be a farmer than a librarian. And that's a good example in a very simple form of that gap between System 1 and System 2. Now, which system are you going to rely on to save the planet? Probably not System 1. How much of our decision-making is being driven by System 1 at the moment? Probably more than it should. So again, this is kind of part of the framing of the game. Now, if you're interested, I've done a TED talk on this in terms of a different project that I did when I was at the stats office. But just to show you, this is not an intelligence test, this sort of stuff, right? So I did a quiz at the statistics office. How well do you know your local area, right? So it would ask people simple questions. Tap in your postcode, and it would ask you questions like, for every 100 people in your neighborhood, how many of them own their own home? Or how many of them are Muslim? How many of them are Christian? Just simple social and demographic characteristics of your neighborhood. One of the things that we found when we published this game was it was sensationally popular with people. Rather than just being blasted information, to ask them what they think first, and then to say, here's the reality, was a very instructive sort of learning environment. And what we also found out was that absolutely everyone was terrible at it, including people like the national statistician, people that you would expect to be good at it. I tested Jeremy Paxman on it once for his own area at a party, and he told me to sod off because he got such a low score on it. So there is fun and learning to be had in this space.
Can you tell us a bit about how gamification actually kind of corrects that bias or preconception as you engage?
Well, I think it's a very gentle but important distinction, which is, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of this recently in the last few years. If you just stand there and tell someone they're wrong, does that mean you're going to win the argument or change opinions? Probably not. Gamification provides a relatively safe space for us to be having that discussion about your preconceptions and your biases. It focuses a lot more on reward and insight, and less on just telling people you're useless, right? Like, which in the context of climate change is not a great place to start with. So gamification is a nice, gentle space. It can be educational, it can be rewarding. And I think what we found is, and that's evidenced by the 15+ minutes, it can be fun. And fun is also important here because that helps generate the will to learn.